All right, I make it 2 minutes past the hour, so I say let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on making open access agreements more transparent to authors. Thanks so much for joining. We've got about 80 people online now, and more coming in from all over the world, so that's really great to see. I'll be your host for today, and I will do a very quick introduction. My name is Romy Beard, and I am the publisher management platform that works with funders, institutions, publishers, and most importantly, authors. And for those that don't know me, I've been working in scholarly communications for the last 17 years, and previously I've been managing the IFA licensing program, where I've been signing open access agreements with publishers on behalf of libraries and consortia in developing countries. So before I introduce you to our speakers, I just wanted to clarify, what do I mean by open access agreements? And in this case, I'm referring to transformative agreements or transitional agreements, such as read and publish or publish and read agreements, but also institutional membership agreements that provide discounts, for example, for born or fully open access publishers. Also funder agreements where funders pay APCs directly, as well as country waivers or country discounts. And the aim of all of these agreements is really to bring in the cost spent by the authors and take them in, as well as together with the access costs, under one agreement, if applicable. And the aim is really to take the burden of paying away from the author. And that's what we want to talk about here as well, really the focus on the author. And overall, the aim is really to increase open access content and reduce paywalls. And if we look at the data, and I think Colleen will have a slide on this later as well, is that more and more institutions are signing agreements. And in the ESAC registry, we could see that last year, over 160,000 articles were published through these types of agreements, and the numbers are rising. But there's some problems with some of this brings along for authors, because agreement title lists vary from one agreement to the other. Not always all publishers' journals are included in agreements. Sometimes fully open access titles aren't included. Sometimes society-owned titles aren't included. And sometimes there's a cap, so it can make it a little bit difficult for authors to know what are the exact conditions. And that's what we want to focus on, talk about today, how we can make that a little bit clearer for authors. So I've got 4 great speakers online. I've got Chris Pym from Springer Nature, Sybille Geisenheyner from American Chemical Society, Alwaleed Alkhaja from Qatar National Library, and Colleen Campbell from the Max Planck Digital Library. So before I hand over, just a couple of housekeeping things. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll email the recording to everyone who registered and or attended. There's a chat box, there's also a Q&A. Unless your questions are very specific, we'll leave them to the end. I've asked everyone to speak for 10 minutes, so there should be time for discussion and Q&A at the end. So without further ado, sorry, I forgot to advance my slide, but everyone's seen you. I'll hand over to Alwaleed Alkhaja from the Qatar National Library, which I had the pleasure of visiting during IFL General Assembly. And on your slides. The floor is yours, Alwaleed. Thank you. You're on mute just now.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this. Let me try to share my screen. And I hope this works. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we've got you in presenter mode. In presenter mode now. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So today I'll be talking about how we promote the library's open access fund in Qatar. And one of the things that we want to mention is that open access supports the library's mission and is one of our core values. What we've noticed in the last couple of years is that there's an increase in the adoption of open access by researchers here. At one point in 2020, it exceeded 50% of all papers in which have a Qatar-based corresponding author. The problem, however, is that authors in Qatar don't have institutional support. There's still a lack of general mandates for open access, and they tend to have to pay from their own pocket or seek out external grants. So the library decided to have an open access fund, which started 2017, but really launched properly in 2018. And the goal of this fund is to cover open access publishing costs for Qatar-based researchers. And because of the open licensing of open access, well, we're hoping that we can build a permanent archive of all research that's taking place in the country. To benefit from this, it's quite easy. Authors, of course, need to be, or the corresponding author needs to be affiliated with a Qatar-based institution. They have, well, they need to have exhausted other sources of funding, and they need to publish or have a paper accepted in a journal that meets our criteria, such as being listed in DOAJ or being part of one of the different agreements that we have. And in the last 3.5 years, we've supported more than 2,000 articles, as you can see here, supporting 1,000 different authors from 30 different institutions in Qatar. And just give you an idea of how we deal with publishers. So we've received requests from about 100 different publishers throughout the last 3 years. And we've supported funding for 33 of the publishers. And it's to do with either that they don't meet criteria or they have to meet the criteria, or and sometimes we reject because of a lack of funding at the time of request. In general, we have 19 different agreements. Not all of them are active right now, but at one point we had 19. 11 read and publish agreements and 8 fully open access agreements. And then this is where the kind of the issues come up, right? So for us as a library and for the authors, we need to navigate this kind of maze of different agreements. And here I'm just kind of give an example of the different types of scenarios. So some publishers have systems for tracking requests, others don't. Some publishers allow authors to request funds at submission, and others only at acceptance. Some publishers have an author journey, which can be short, but it could be also very complicated, especially with licensing. And other publishers allow us to click from using a click of a button that we can approve funding. Some publishers can allow for retroactive or open access inclusion, either a couple of months or even a year. Others, you can't include anything in your account once an invoice has been issued. And some publishers allow for pre-peer review approvals, and others would only do it post-peer review. So as you can see, some are very flexible, others are not. So for authors, it's a problem because it's not easy to find out what is available, and some authors are still unaware of the service. Now, the question is, how do we promote it in Qatar? As a library, we have 3 ways of doing so. The first one, sorry, my phone is. So the first one is, so we have 3 different approaches. The main channel is the library's website, but we also have a communication plan, something that we write every year. And I'll talk about that in a second. And we also are dependent on publishers and their different systems and activities and channels, of course. So for authors in Qatar, the main way of finding out about these agreements is our website. So this is a screenshot of Qatar National Library's website, and they would go on the researchers and click on open access program. And we've designed the web page to be quite simple, to clarify the very high level criteria, as you can see here, and the different routes. So for us, we have the publishing agreements with the different publishers, but we also have a fund which covers any request that is not covered by an agreement. And we've tried to clarify, simplify everything. But of course, based on feedback from researchers over time, we've created this page. And this is a list of all publishers. And I must admit, this is kind of inspired by the Max Planck webpage, which I hope we will hear about more later. But what we have right now is a page which lists every single publisher. It shows the status of the agreement, which shows if it's not active or active. And we update this regularly, even daily sometimes. I mean, as soon as it's inactive, the changes are made immediately on the same day. Then we also show or we link to the publisher's website, which shows which journals are part of the agreement and which are not. We also have a link on our website to which we call instructions to authors. So based on conversations with different publishers, we've come up with a very basic step-by-step list that is specific for each publisher. As I mentioned, each publisher is different, so we need to have different instructions. Now, the website itself is based on some work. We've done a survey in 2019, tried to figure out the different pain points. We did a design, some user testing and focus groups, finding out what is essential for the different authors in Qatar. We launched in 2020. We looked at some user behavior testing as well in 2021, and we're looking maybe into doing several improvements this year. So to give you an example of, let's say, user behavior, we'll be looking at heat maps and how authors click on our website. So as you can see here, this is a screenshot of our webpage. This is the first thing that they would go in, and this is kind of looking at heat map of, I believe, 5 months. And kind of the main observations that we have is that authors would come in, they would click on the list of publishers, which is here and here, so it's duplicated, but you can see it's the highest. And then the second most popular area is the fund application. And then the contact us page, the contact us or the email here. Now, what we found also kind of surprising is that the frequently asked questions and the contact our team web form are not so very popular, even though authors have requested this. But you know, from what we can see, it matches what we expected from the authors. Now, I mentioned we have a communications plan, and this is something that we devise every year. So we sit down and think about different objectives, which are the stakeholders that we want to reach out to. But we also have these standardized high-level activities. So we have a bi-monthly newsletter, which we use to update authors with any new agreements or new workflows. We have quarterly webinars. We visit institutions when possible, but we've been recently having webinars. Of course, we have Open Access Week, and we have an annual survey. This survey we've been doing for 3 years now, every December. And we send it to all the authors who submitted requests to the library. I mentioned 1,000, but the number is much higher. And the way that the goal of the survey is to investigate ways to improve the service, the scope, and communication, but also we try to understand the author's needs and pain points. And through standardized questions, such as Net Promoter Score, we try to see how we perform year on year. And one example of kind of the insight that we get is this. So this is from the survey that we did last month, in which we asked, how did the availability of the library's open access fund influence your decision to publish your article as open access? And we had 100 respondents, and a majority, 83%, 83, said they would only publish if the library or the open access fund covers it, which highlights the importance of clear communication to authors of what's available. Now, of course, we're also dependent on publishers to have information on their websites, to have systems that can inform authors about agreements, have good workflows that can recognize eligible authors, and have clear workflows of contact for the library. We need to know who we're dealing with from the different publishers. But of course, there are still challenges. You know, there's information overload for authors. There are too many different workflows, from pre-submission, during submission, post-acceptance. And the main problem for us is, even though the website is our main channel, authors don't actually visit the website that much. I mean, not the majority of authors go through the website. It's not part of their workflow. In some cases, the website and the publishers, our website and the publisher's website are not always in sync. One is updated before the other. So the risk, finally, is that with all these challenges that we're facing, is that without mandates here forcing authors to publish open access, authors are finding the workflows, the information too complex, and they may choose not to publish open access, which goes against what we're trying to do. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And here are my contact details and the website, if you're interested to check it out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alwaleed. Thank you so much. I think we'll go straight into the next presentation, which is Chris. If you can share your screen. Thank you.
With me 1 second, just while I share.
good. So we've got Chris Pym from Springer Nature.
Okay.
How that works.
Right. Okay, so thanks very much, Romy. I will get through this as swiftly as I can. So I think probably the place to start is to pose a question to everyone, which is, I actually, technically speaking, am employed by a fully open access publisher, but today I'm going to be talking about transformative agreements. So I technically work for Biomed Central, but today I'm talking about our hybrid journals rather than fully open access journals. And so why would I have insights into what we need to do around making things clear to authors? And I'll try and answer that as we go through. But to set the scene, I'm sure most people are aware of who we are, but we're a large mixed model publishing company. So we publish both fully open access, subscription only, and hybrid open access or transformative journals mostly now. And we believe, broadly speaking, that the transition to open access is a good thing. It offers both society as a whole and also individual researchers many different benefits, and that really all things considered, this is the way that the future is. So we are in favor of the transition to open access. That is not to say that it is necessarily a simple process. But one of the things that we've seen over recent years is the explosion in the number of transformative agreements that both we have as a publisher, and, as has already been touched upon, the number of publishers that are offering these transformative agreements. They often cover multiple imprints within a publisher. They're operating in different countries, and the idea behind them is both to grow the amount of open access content that is being published, but also to simplify that from a workflow perspective. So rather than having many individual micropayments, there are essentially a single payment to cover a full year's worth of publishing, and to bundle together the cost for the subscription content that's included with the publishing content, hence the read and publish naming. And as a side effect of this, agreements make open access an easy choice for authors. When we look at the perhaps slightly less altruistic benefits of open access, if we look at, for instance, benefits directly to authors, then we can see that there are publishing open access is associated with more downloads, with more citations, with more attention. That, one would assume, will feed through into more real world impact through things like policy. Although the lack of a metric for sort of real world impact for research is something that I think everyone would love to have a way of defining that a bit more clearly. And so we can, through these agreements, we can give authors and institutions all of those benefits. And at the same time, we can streamline and simplify workflows. So rather than potentially an institution or an author having to make many individual APC payments or other publication fee payments over the course of a year, we can bundle that all together into a single payment. So we have built significant amounts of technology and service around these ideas in order to support these read and publish agreements that we have in place. And so we have built it. And I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the quote, but a film from the 1980s, and I'm showing my age here, from The Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner: "If you build it, they will come." Won't they? And the simple answer is no, not necessarily, because the choice of where to publish is made obviously before most people encounter the APC as a potential fee that they will need to pay. So we need to address whether or not an article is going to be covered through an agreement at the point of submission. And in order to do that, it's quite difficult because we don't necessarily know where an author is looking. We don't necessarily know what criteria an author is looking at with regard to a journal. And certainly the research that we undertake on a regular basis through author surveys would indicate that still some of the primary decision-making sort of metrics for a journal are things like journal impact factor. And I'm sure we have many people that are aware of the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessments. It is something that we are signed up to, but it is still something that authors consider when they're selecting what journal to publish in, unfortunately. So we need to communicate the benefits of open access and the fact that open access options are available and agreements that will support that ease of use are available much earlier in the process. And so one of the things that we do, exactly as Dr. Alkhaja was describing, is we have a website for each agreement. And so this is an example of what one of our web pages would look like. This is for an agreement that just started with Egypt. And it will provide information to authors around the journals that are covered, the institutions that are participating in the agreement, and various other bits of information specific to that particular agreement. And so that's great. We have the same challenge that was described previously, in that a web page is a destination, it's not a route. And it's a destination that not everyone will find. Not everyone will even think to look to see if there is a web page that is providing information around agreements and potential agreements that may be relevant. So we have to take a more proactive approach towards communication with potential authors. And that has to happen outside of the systems that we use for the submission and peer review process. And so largely we do this through two main channels. The first is what we would call partner engagement. That's a kind of a bit of a catch-all to cover people like me, but also people that work in other historically face-to-face customer roles. And so that would include things like webinars, face-to-face presentations, training sessions, as well as press releases, library support, that kind of quite bespoke, highly targeted, potentially quite high impact work, but that inevitably has a relatively limited reach. And we couple that with more wide-reaching, but arguably less impactful communication through to authors using digital and email channels such as social media, using paid advertising, as well as advertising within the platforms that we ourselves own, and emailing authors where we have the permission in order to contact them. And tying all of this together, we have a dedicated support staff to cover these agreements. And so if anyone is ever unsure, OA verification at springernature.com will get you through to someone that will be able to answer a question. At the end, what we then try and do is we try and once we've reached the point of acceptance, we then have built, as I've said, workflows that should make this very straightforward. Effectively, the flowchart on the right-hand side talks through the process that an author would go through. This, as I've touched on, is now being used by a significant number of institutions. And the feedback that we have is obviously never going to be 100% perfect, but by and large, this seems to be a workflow that works well for institutions. We use the corresponding author's affiliation to determine whether or not a particular manuscript is covered, and they provide us information around their affiliation. We disambiguate that using the GRID database, although we will be using RAW in the future. And we combine that with information on IP range and email domain. That then, if relevant, is passed to an agreed person within an institution or within a consortium to authorize, and then a decision can be made around whether or not that will be covered for open access. The majority of our agreements default to open access, but where there are restrictions, then there can be opt-outs for researchers. And ultimately that takes us all the way through to the article being published online. And so to wrap up, these agreements have significantly seen us speed the transition towards open access. And of these facts, which are actually 2020 facts, not 2021 facts, because we don't have those data yet, these agreements supported us publishing 124,000 open access articles last year across fully open access and hybrid open access journals. But more impressively, within those institutions, within those countries and institutions where we have open access agreements, within 8 of them, over 70% of our publishing output is now immediately open access, and contributes towards us publishing 1 in 5 open access articles globally. And so I do think that these agreements can dramatically speed up the transition to open access as we move forward into the future. And that covers what I wanted to run through today. If anyone has questions, I'll be happy to deal with them at the end.
Thank you so much, Chris. Bang on time, and quite an interesting, different perspective there on having to bring things in during the journal, like the decision-making process when authors are thinking about which journals they might want to publish in, which leads me nicely onto our next speakers. And before I pass you on, the next 2 speakers are going to mention some tools that they use for authors to help navigate the different available agreements, journals through agreements, but also perhaps help them make a decision on where to publish. So one of the tools you can do that is the journal checker tool, which is more of a check your journal. Is it in an agreement, or is it funder compliant as well, which is another element we're not touching on today so much. And the other examples I've listed here are the Wageningen University tool, and then also Lausanne have a tool where you can search across over 40,000 journals and see which ones are included in agreements and which ones are not. So just put that out here, and we'll share the slides if anyone finds that useful. And it'd be interesting to hear our next 2 speakers talk about that in a little bit more detail and how they use their tool, notably Colleen from the Max Planck Digital Library. So I'll hand you on to Colleen.
Yep. And let me just share my screen now. Thank you so much. Give me 1 sec. And there we go. Okay, perfect. Great. Right, so making research communication as easy as possible, that's what I'm going to talk about. And it's really quite interesting to see, we've not coordinated among panelists today our presentations, but I think it's really cool how we're each covering different aspects, and it's all fitting in really nicely together. So let me advance my screen. There you go. My institution, the Max Planck Society for the Advancement of Science, is one of the largest research organizations in the world. We've got over 86 institutes across Germany and also outside of Germany, and facilities that conduct basic research in the service of the general public in the natural sciences, life sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. And the thousands of researchers we have at the Society produce around 15,000 research papers a year. Now, the Max Planck Society has been always a promoter of open access in scholarly communication because, and this is the key message of this slide, scholarly communication is part of the research process. That is our basic premise. And so with that in mind, for science to function well, to fulfill the purpose of science, it needs to be communicated openly, because the more researchers can see, new research, the better the peer review process works, the more, the faster science can progress through sharing of that knowledge. So that is the baseline of our perspective. And with that, the Society was one of the initiators of the Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Knowledge in the Sciences and Humanities. I think most of the folks on the call might be familiar with the white paper from 2015, published by my colleague Ralph Schimmer and my other colleagues, which, in 2015, if the Berlin Declaration was in 2003, many, many years later, we still were not at a point where open access was the default in scholarly communication. And so new strategies needed to be integrated. And that is where the white paper comes into play, and this concept that we need to focus on transitioning today's scholarly journals that are operating on a subscription-based model to open access, to really achieve large-scale open access, which then prompted the Open Access 2020 initiatives and the ESAC initiative, which is more, for our purposes today, perhaps the more relevant, the ESAC being a global community practice of research libraries and consortia that are promoting efficiencies and standards around negotiation, but also implementation of transformative and open access publishing agreements. So that's just kind of a basis on where I'm coming from here. Now, how do we put this into practice, transitioning today's scholarly journals to open access? Well, based on that white paper and the work of a group of library consortia working with publishers, first on agreements called offset agreements that then transition to what we have today, which are transformative agreements. This is the strategy that we're taking. We're looking at scholarly publishing. Oops. Maybe you're not seeing my video. How about now? Are you seeing my video? Romy?
Yep, we see it now, yep.
Okay, great. I don't know what happened. It was an internet thing, I think. So what we're doing as libraries is looking at scholarly publishing from a different perspective. We're not looking at journals from this perspective of readers, but from the perspective of authors. So what you have here, this pie chart, is a snapshot of the article output, annual article output. I think this is actually, it's a little bit outdated. The proportions are from 2017, I think, but more or less it's pretty consistent year on year. This is the output of Max Planck Society researchers. So in the journals where they submit and publish their articles, and taking this perspective and looking at empowering our authors with the opportunity and the means to publish their articles openly, we have, when subscription renewals have come up, we have proposed to the publishers transformative agreements, because this is what we're trying to enable, giving our authors the opportunity to publish without having to pay ABCs. We use our library funds that were formerly invested in subscriptions to support open access publishing. And in this pie chart, you'll see some of the slices are a dark orange or dark gold orange color. Those are fully open access publishers. And of course, we negotiate agreements with fully OA publishers. We've been doing that since well over a decade, actually. Yeah, so we just, every time a renewal agreement comes up, we try to negotiate an open access agreement. So you see the yellow now are where we actually have a transformative agreement in place, so our authors can publish openly in journals by these publishers. Springer, Nature, and Wiley, you see, are through the nationwide project deal agreements in Germany. Then the gray is, of course, still subscription-based, but we hope to get to a point where that can also be open access for our authors. And of course, we continue to work on the long tail of publishers that are, might have just a few journals, and maybe we don't have a lot of article output, but of course we need to foster a diverse publishing environment for our authors, and yes, ensure across all disciplines authors have the opportunity to publish. So we continue that work. So through all of these agreements, the next question is, how do I make sure that our authors are aware of their options? And to address that, we have created this this database, and Alwaleed referenced it earlier, and thank you, that's very kind of you. We've got, here you're seeing just the front page of this, and then if you were to click on the link and you've got the link at the bottom, you could then enter the database. It's basically a database of journal titles by publishers where we have agreements in place to cover their open access publishing fees, so APCs, or through our transformative agreements that might be not an APC based, but a publish and read fee that's negotiated by the consortium, but also, of course, the agreements that we have in place with fully OA publishers. And we are also incorporating into the database DOAJ data to show authors their opportunity to publish without APCs. Once you go inside the database, then authors can filter the complete title list by subject, by publisher, by OA type, so fully OA, like in a fully OA journal or in a hybrid journal, by license type even, so showing the different CC BY variations, CC 0, or also excluding where we might, where we might not actually have license data updated. Yes, and also you can filter by data source, so a given publisher or DOAJ, etc. So this is the front end, and now I don't handle the back end work myself, but here is a snapshot of what this looks like on the back end. You see we are compiling data from various sources. That data gets standardized and presented in a common list. To keep the effort of maintaining such a list to a minimum, this is all automated, and the list is generated and updated on a daily basis. Once we get the data from the publishers or from the provider, let's say, the title data is enhanced with our own data from the library. You have the authors, there are agreements, etc. In some cases, we're also adding LCC subject categories. And then in terms of what you see, we're not actually doing any manual corrections or anything. It's all automated. So, I mean, this also means that depending on how up to date the data we are receiving from the various sources are, the actual interface might not give authors the full picture or the precise picture, right? Because maybe we've just signed an agreement and they are an eligible author under that agreement, but we haven't gotten the title list from the publisher, or the title list hasn't been updated. And so, yeah, there can be lag times. And yeah, that's so what we're living with in today's world of transition. Yeah, so this list is, yeah, it's a useful tool. We do have also in Germany, some of you might be aware of the, I say EZB in English, an electronic journals library that's kind of a unified catalog across Germany. And if and when OA services are integrated, OA data is integrated into that list fully, then perhaps this list will become redundant. Maybe we have a list on a national level. But in the meantime, yeah, you see other solutions popping up that Romy showed you before that show even in broader, that have an even broader scope. So just to close this out, benefits of having our own system for informing authors, our own database. It gives us the opportunity to bring together all of the relevant details, and then linking to other information and services. It provides a custom service for our authors, for our librarians, for our purchasing departments, and many other stakeholders of the organization. The drawbacks, of course, of the system is that it is only as powerful as the data that we get from the publishers and other sources. So just to sort of close out my brief talk here, is that our perspective, we have this title list and it is used by authors. We are collecting some usage data, but we're not really analyzing it. So I really can't give you information there. But our perspective is actually one, as I said before, scholarly communication is part of the research process. And if we want to enable open access on a large scale, we need to stop thinking about it as something different. You saw in Christopher's presentation, the sort of the article journey or the author journey. And at one point there was a deviation, go OA or go, the old route or the traditional route. And too often, or still too often, the systems that are in place and even our own thinking, right? Our process, our workflows, our perspectives are looking at open access as the exception. It's something new. It's a detour that we have to take. It's somewhere where we are pushing our authors. This perspective that we are adopting is actually another, and I think we are all in this transition phase, and we are moving to this new perspective where open access is the default. And so we want to bring open access to the natural habitat of our authors, which are journals. You know, journals for the moment, for today, generally they are journals, and in the future it might be something else. And so much more work needs to be done to make that article and author journey as streamlined and as open facing as possible. And that work needs to happen in journal submission systems. It needs to happen through communication. And here, the ESAC workflow recommendations set out how that can be achieved. And those recommendations have just been updated and published online. So I would encourage you to go have a look. There's a link at the bottom to help your thinking around what communications that publishers can make, and also institutions, to really enable and help their authors with the open access publishing process. And then, of course, getting back to the question of data, not only do we need good data, but we need to work on streamlined infrastructure to help streamline the author, publisher, library workflows across the ecosystem. And we already see things like OA Switchboard trying to fill that need. So with that, I think I've concluded.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I'll try and put the link to your NPDL tool in the chat so other people can go and have a look and see what it looks like as well, as a tool to help people navigate the different agreements. But I'll hand over just now to Sybille, who's our last speaker. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Romy. I will start sharing my screen. And you give me a hint.
You're not in presenter mode yet. No, I can see your notes.
How about now?
Yep, we're good.
Good. Okay. So I will really try to stick to my script here so we can have enough time really at the end of the discussion of the session to have a fruitful discussion. So my name is Sybille Geisenheyner. I'm the Director of Open Science Strategy and Licensing here at the ACS. And I will give a short overview on where we are at the American Chemical Society in regards of open science and the status quo of transformative agreements, such as read and publish as an example. I will then give an overview of what tools are available and at what points ACS communicates with authors during the publishing process about existing agreements and compliance with possible funder mandates. As a division of the American Chemical Society, ACS Publications supports researchers through journals, ebooks, scientific programs, and news magazines, chemical and engineering news. As in everything ACS publishing does, chemistry is the center and the focus is on the researcher. Open science is something ACS committed to early on. In 2013, ACS introduced author choice, an open access license model that was really tailored to the needs of authors at that time. This was followed by all kinds of discount programs, such as author rewards, a $60 million program to make open access publishing more attractive. Open access journals such as ACS Central Science and Omega followed in 2015 and 16. And in 2018, the ACS found the preprint service ChemArchive together with 4 other societies. All ACS journals are preprint friendly by now. The first read and publish contracts were signed in 2017. And at the beginning of 2021, the ACS committed itself to the DORA principles, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. 2020, ACS also announced 10 new gold journals, which have been open for submission since the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. But let's look closer at transformative agreements. ACS strongly prolongs the path of transformative agreements, such as read and publish and read, offset. They are different colors, I would say. And for those, but I think others have mentioned it before, who are unfamiliar with those agreements, to describe them, it's mainly a contract between an institution and a publisher combining reading access, as well as the opportunity for affiliated researchers to publish open access in their journal portfolio without being charged individually for doing so. And authors from institutions in the UK, Germany, Netherlands, Finland, and so on, just to name a few, are now able to publish via an ACS read and publish agreement in their well-known hybrid, but also in many cases in the new gold journals. ACS has developed a clear and transparent model to support this transition. Offers are adapted to respective individual situations, of institutions. Also, that sometimes is really a big challenge, because if you have institutions or consortia where the overall output is not really, does not correlate in any way with the financial possibilities, those situations really need a lot of talks and a lot of compromises to be made on both sides. But when these compromises are found, transformative agreements have an astonishing effect on the open access output, which can be seen very well in the graph on the right. Over 4,800 articles have been published open access because of transformative agreements we have in place in 2021. In most cases, we see an uptake Hello.
Sybille, are you still there, or is it my connection?
There seems to be a technical problem at Sybille's side.
Okay. Yeah, so you can hear me, but we've lost Sybille. Well, hopefully she will come back in a second. In the meantime, is there any questions that we've got in the Q&A, Martin, that we want to answer just now while we're waiting?
So I know there are a few questions that are primarily directed to Chris at Springer Nature. And so I don't know if, Chris, you want to comment on those, or if those are more specific and you may want to reach out specifically to those that ask them.
So I think that certainly I've seen the question from Suzanne, which I think, from looking at it, I suspect that this relates to a fully open access agreement rather than to a transformative read and publish agreement. If Suzanne can confirm that, I think that probably the best thing to do here is to take that offline, because of course it relates to a specific situation. But yeah, certainly it clearly isn't in our interests as a publisher to mislead authors. So without knowing exactly what has happened there, it's a little hard for me to comment.
Okay, we'll put you in touch and you can look at that specific case. We also, I see you have a question from Robert O'Donnell for you, asking if you check the corresponding author's affiliation to check for eligibility in agreements.
Yes, so we have coalesced around what I think is now the kind of de facto industry standard, which is we define an author as being associated with a particular institution based on the corresponding authorship. And specifically, if they have multiple affiliations, their first declared affiliation. The way that the workflow actually runs is effectively at the point of editorial acceptance, we will ask people to define their affiliation. That's not least because at the point of submission, they may have moved to a new institution, and accordingly, the coverage may have changed. We will disambiguate that in order to account for the fact that obviously the University of Zurich could be Universität Zurich or University of Zurich. We also track the IP range and email domain that the corresponding author is using, and if we get a match on one of those three determinants, then we'll push it through to authorization by the institution in question.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that hopefully answers that question.
Yes, thank you. There's another question which was in the chat. I don't know if that's the question you referred to earlier, about authors that tend to get confused if they see an article advertised at no cost to you. Was this the same thing Martin picked up?
Yeah, I think this is the same issue, and I think that this is related to some messaging that is included in the workflow for the fully open access arrangements that we have, rather than for the transformative arrangements. I'm having to guess because obviously
no problem. Exactly. I had some questions for everyone around, maybe Colleen and Alwaleed can come back and switch their cameras on because it looks like Sybille is lost. One thing I wanted to talk about, and you both touched on this a little bit, is about, when is it most important that we're really clear with authors? So one thing that we talked a little bit, that Colleen talked about in the tool that they use, and other tools that are out there about making this information available to authors pre-submission and while they are making choices about where they might want to publish, by including different filters, for example. And then Alwaleed and Chris, you've talked a little bit about during the submission process, which is really like more of an author workflow issue, right? Making sure the agreement is recognized while you're submitting, and that's really working on the assumption that the author knows where they're publishing. They might not be aware of an agreement, but making sure they're eligible if they submit to that journal. Any other thoughts on this, on when we want to make sure it's what is most important? Go ahead, Alwaleed.
Thanks for the question. So I think at this point, with the different information that we got from publishers, we figured out a way to communicate to authors what's available. The problem, however, is this is kind of dynamic. What's available in January is not necessarily available in October, November, when the fund goes down. And this applies to more or less every single agreement that we've had, especially in 2020, where authors published much more than anticipated previously. So for us, I think we can talk about workflows, we can talk about different points of interaction, but for us, the core problem that we think with any open access fund is the question of, well, I don't even know the answer, but the question is, how do we give authors the certainty that before they submit, they know somebody's going to pay for their article, and that's what we're trying to figure out here. And I think this is an issue that authors face, especially when they can go to their website or go to any website and say, or even the publisher's website and say, there's an agreement. Great. But however, by the time they get the paper accepted, this is no longer applicable. And that's the core issue that we have.
I mean, in terms of publisher systems perspective, surely some of it should be based on acceptance date. What is your experience, Colleen, with agreements? Are they based on, submission date? It should be based on when you submit the article, not based on acceptance date.
Yeah, no, the verdict is not out on that. I mean, there can be advantages and disadvantages to different ones. And we've got publishers who are working with different, either submission date or acceptance date. So yeah, that still needs to be clarified. I think the point is also we have to have, or what I would like to highlight is there has to be customization. That's extremely important, and we have to communicate to authors everywhere, right? We can't force them into one space. That it has to be in every aspect of their interaction with journals.
Yeah, so both pre-submission during the selection process, but also during the submission process. And there's another comment there for you, Chris. Sorry, also going back to the same issue as you can see. So clearly, there's maybe some, unclear communication that maybe you could address on. Funding is this is at no cost to you, but they only have partial funding.
Yeah, I think that the issue that we're having here, if it is the issue that I'm thinking that it is related to some boilerplate text that is included into the author journey. So as they go through the process, it basically says this may be covered centrally once the at no cost to you is the language, which at the moment is causing problems for some people because they're not reimbursing the full cost of the APC. At the moment, because that's boilerplate, it's not editable, but that should be something that becomes less of an issue. In fact, it should go away entirely as an issue later this year because we're removing the, this is going to get very technical now.
Yeah.
That step in the process.
You only have 1 minute to answer a question.
Yeah,
didn't say that.
That step in the process is going away later this year, and will be much more highly customizable because of it. It's basically because we're still operating with the old BMC back end, but with a new front end stuck on top of it, basically.
Yeah.
So that will be going away. But if my email address is christopher.pym@springernature.com. If any and all of those people want to get in touch with me, then I'm more than happy to set up a call to talk about it specifically with one or more of you.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. I wanted to say that the issue is also like authors obviously have problems to navigate all these different agreements, but for publishers equally, each agreement is different. And in my experience with working with publishers on workflows and things like that, is that they have to accommodate all the different workflows, and everyone wants something else and wants different text displayed. So it's also tricky from that point of view, I understand. Alwaleed, you wanted to say something else?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a call for publishers to be a bit more flexible, to think that, we all figure this out together. So there's not always one solution. So it's a journey together. And yeah, I think flexibility is really important as we try to figure out what's the best way of doing things.
Absolutely. It's still a very collaborative process, and it's really good to bring different stakeholders together to have a bit of a discussion. I'm so sorry, Sybille didn't finish up, but I'll share these slides again, and here are some examples that you can look at that might help, at least in the pre-submission side. We didn't touch and talked a little bit as well about what happens during the workflow and how there can be complications for authors if it's not recognized once they know where to submit. So hopefully some food for thought. Although we lost one along the way, we started with 4. I'm aware of time, and I really hate to keep people. I know everyone's got a really busy schedule, so I think we'll wrap up. If there's any more questions coming, I will direct them to the speakers. Also share the recording with everyone. If you want to stay up to date with what's coming up at ChronosHub, please join our newsletter on our website, and we've also got some other exciting webinars coming up about streamlining OA management for universities, and webinar in March helping researchers guide through the OA process. So please stay tuned. And I just want to say massive thank you to all our speakers today. Thank you so much for joining and taking the time. And any questions, please get in touch with myself or Martin. And we'll be happy to forward questions to our speakers, because I'm sure you didn't all catch everybody's email addresses. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sybille Geisenheyner, and I'm the Director of Open Science Strategy and Licensing here at the ACS. Unfortunately, I had some technical issues today. This is why that session had to be recorded, and so I'm not able to take part in the live discussion at the end. But I hope you find that presentation useful, and if you want to get in touch, my contact details are at the end of the presentation. So what I will do is give a short overview on where the American Chemical Society is in regards to open science and the status quo of transformative agreements such as read and publish or publish and read. I will then give an overview at what points we communicate with authors during the publishing process about existing agreements and compliance with their funder mandate. As a division of the American Chemical Society, ACS Publication supports researchers through journals, ebooks, scientific programs, news magazines, and so on. As in everything ACS Publishing does, chemistry is in the center and focus on the researcher. Open science is something ACS committed to early on. In 2013, ACS introduced author choice, an open access licensing model which was tailored to the needs of authors at the time. This was followed by all kinds of discount programs, such as author rewards, a $60 million program to make open access publishing more attractive. Open access journals, such as ACS Central Science and Omega, followed in 2015 and 2016. In 2018, the ACS fund the preprint service ChemArchive together with 4 other societies. All ACS journals are preprint friendly. The first read and publish contract was signed in 2017, and at the beginning of 2021, the ACS committed itself to the Dover Principles, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. Also in 2020, ACS announced Jack's Gold and 9 other gold journals, which have been open for submission since end of 2020, beginning of 2021. But let's look a bit closer at transformative agreements. ACS strongly prolongs the path of transformative agreements. For those of you who are unfamiliar, and I think some of the other speakers already explained what it is, read and publish, it describes a contract between an institution and a publisher combining reading access as well as the opportunity for affiliated researchers to publish open access in their journal portfolio without being charged any individual APCs for doing so. Authors from institutions in the UK, Germany, Netherlands, just to name a few, are now able to publish via an ACS read and publish agreement in their well-known hybrid and in many cases as well in the gold journals. ACS has also developed a clear and transparent model to support this transition. Offers are adapted to the respective individual situation of the institution. A big challenge are, of course, situations where the output of an institution does not really correlate in any way with the financial possibilities. In such situations, many compromises have to be made on both sides. But when these compromises are found, transformative agreements have an astonishing effect on the open access output, which can be seen very well on the graph on the right. Over 4,800 articles have been published open access due to transformative agreements in 2021. In most cases, we see uptakes over 90% open access from authors, means less than 10% opt out from the process. For us, of course, this is not at least due to the workflow that we developed with CCC, among others. It is also our internal workflow and author communication driving this, as they are transparent for the author and easy to control for the institutions. Feedback is received on a regular basis, and attempts are made to implement those feedbacks in order to further optimize these workflows. But how do authors learn about existing agreements and their funder mandate? There are third-party tools, and some of them have been described in the earlier presentations already, and those can help authors and libraries to check the compatibility of mandates. There is the ESAC registry, for example, the Coalition as Journal Checker tool, but also institutional websites can be a valuable resource. On the positive side, they are multi-publisher, so authors don't have to go to individual publisher sites to find out. They are easy to use and in a more or less neutral environment, I would say. On the cons side, when the information arrives in these tools, it has already passed through several hands. And some of the entries are incomplete and not up to date. The biggest disadvantage, however, is that they are not integrated into the publication process, and that has been mentioned as well before. So when authors come to us as a publisher to publish, they often come without any prior information about obligation and mandates. They come to us to publish in that specific journal. And here we take our responsibility as a publisher seriously and provide authors with information at various points in the process. Open access starts before submission. Together with ChronosHub, we have built an ACS journal finder tool to help authors to choose the right journal in line with their funder mandate. The tool gives individual up-to-date messaging depending on funder and institution or in combination. It also keeps track, in example, if an agreement has a limited amount of open access publishing tokens, so author can get in touch with their library for further information. Authors are also made aware of requirements so that may be expected through Plan S, and author can explore more information about this at the acsopenscience.org webpage. At submission, when authors are asked to report their funding, there is a call out to remind authors that their funders may require open access publication. During production and proving process, our ACS internal license tool helps authors to pick the right license and makes them aware of any mismatch between pick and requirement. The checkout for open access license is depending on the presence of any transformative agreement with an institution or funder and is handled by our partner CCC. Open access articles can get deposited automatically if required, and post-publication requests will be handled by an individual ACS team. So we do have a constant education process in place, and it is important that authors find those information within the process. So that was all I wanted to present today. Here are my contact details. So if you have any further questions or if you want to learn more about the workflow and our internal processes, please get in touch. Thank you.